Nobody could get close to the K9 after his partner died, not even the bravest officers. Until one day, a boy in a wheelchair rolled up, reached out, and did something nobody dared to try. What happened next? It wasn't just unthinkable, it changed everything. Welcome to Woof Woof Stories. Let's uncover what really happened. The rain hammered against the windshield of Officer Greg Hardro's patrol car as he made his way through the empty streets, the steady rhythm of the wipers cutting through the downpour. His K9 partner, Max, sat quietly in the passenger seat, his eyes alert, as if the storm didn't even faze him. Greg glanced over at the German Shepherd, his heart heavy. They'd been together for years, through thick and thin. Greg trusted Max more than anyone, sometimes even more than his own colleagues. But tonight, something felt off. The call came through the radio. Unit 12, we have a 10 to 78 at the old mill. Possible armed suspect. Proceed with caution. Greg's fingers tightened around the wheel. Max's ears perked up. They both knew what that meant. This wasn't just another routine check. It was a potential life-or-death situation. Without a word, Greg accelerated, the tires screeching as they raced toward the location. Max's tail twitched slightly, the only sign of the dog's readiness. They arrived within minutes, the dilapidated structure looming ahead like a ghost from a forgotten time. Greg's heart pounded in his chest as he unlatched the door and stepped out. Max was right beside him, instinctively slipping into position. They had trained for this. They had faced danger countless times before, and each time, they'd come out victorious. "Max, stay close," Greg whispered as he motioned toward the building. The sound of their boots hitting the wet pavement was muffled in the rain as they approached the entrance. The building's door creaked open with a slow, eerie groan. They moved in, Greg's flashlight illuminating the darkness ahead. Max's nose twitched as he picked up the scent of something, someone, close by. A muffled sound came from the shadows, and before Greg could react, the gunshot rang out. Max lunged forward without hesitation, taking the bullet meant for his partner. The sound of the shot echoed through the night, and in that instant, everything changed. Greg's world turned to silence. His partner, his best friend, lay motionless at his feet. Greg knelt beside Max, his breath shallow, as the rain fell harder, mixing with the salt of his tears. The world around him seemed a blur. The moment of the shot, the screech of the metal door, and Max's leap toward him, all of it replayed in his mind like a broken record. Max's body was still warm, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. Greg's hands trembled as he pressed them against the wound, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. He could feel Max's heart slowing, each beat heavier than the last. The dog's breathing was labored, ragged. Greg whispered his name, but there was no response. Max's once vibrant eyes, the ones that had always been so full of life, were now empty, staring at the rain-soaked floor. "I'm here, buddy. I've got you," Greg murmured, his voice breaking. He'd been here for Max through every battle, every chase, every high-speed pursuit. And now, in this moment, it felt like the tables had turned. He had failed. The air around them grew colder, the storm louder. He could hear the distant wail of sirens, but they didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Max wasn't moving anymore. His faithful partner, who had never once left his side, was slipping away. Greg's heart ached with a pain he hadn't known existed. The bond between them had always been something beyond words. It was trust, unspoken and pure. They had shared the highs and the lows, both of them scarred by the dangers of the job. But now, there would be no more high fives after a successful raid. No more shared meals or lazy afternoons on the couch. The final breath Max took was weak, a soft exhale that was swallowed by the storm. It was over. Greg stayed there, holding his partner, unable to move, unable to accept what had just happened. Max, the K9 who had been a hero in every sense of the word, was gone, and Greg was left with nothing but silence and the weight of his grief. The rain didn't stop. It kept falling, relentless and unforgiving, as if nature itself was mourning alongside Greg. The paramedics arrived, but there was no rush, no urgency to revive what had already been lost. Greg stood frozen, his arms still around Max's lifeless body, unwilling to let go. He could feel the eyes of the officers around him, their pity and discomfort hanging in the air like a cloud. They had all seen loss before. Some had even lost their own partners, but this was different. Max wasn't just a dog. He was Greg's protector, his confidant, his best friend. The emptiness inside Greg seemed to echo louder than the storm. The paramedics tried to gently move him, to pull him away from Max, but Greg only clung tighter. "No," he muttered, voice raw. "Not yet." His fingers gripped the fur of Max's neck, and for a fleeting moment, he imagined that he could feel the dog's heartbeat again. But it was just his own pulse, fast and erratic, desperate to make it all stop. When the decision was made to remove Max from his arms, it was as though the world had shifted under Greg's feet. He stumbled back, unable to catch his breath. His knees buckled, but he stayed upright, his hands now pressed against his forehead, trying to block out the reality before him. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, but by the time they placed Max in the back of the van, the rain had turned to a steady drizzle. It was as if the storm was finally giving up, too. No one spoke. The words didn't seem enough, even if they had tried. What could they say? As the van door slammed shut, Greg's heart shattered. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. No longer was there the familiar rustle of Max's collar or the thumping of his paws. There was nothing, just the sound of his own breath, lonely, broken, and painfully aware that he had lost the one being who had truly understood him. The next few days felt like they stretched on forever, each hour dragging its feet as Greg moved through his life in a haze. The police station seemed too bright, too loud, as he walked past the desks where officers went about their work. It was a rhythm he used to share with Max. Now, it felt like he was moving in a world that no longer had a place for him. The grief was suffocating, clinging to him like a heavy fog. But it wasn't just his own sorrow that gnawed at him. It was the emptiness left by Max everywhere Greg went. He was haunted by the absence of the dog who had been by his side through thick and thin. He could almost hear the soft scrape of Max's paws on the floor, the deep growl of his warning, the excited bark when they were gearing up for another call. But there was nothing now, only silence. Greg had tried to go through the motions, checked his emails, answered a few calls, but it all felt like a bad dream. He kept expecting Max to nudge his hand or rest his head on his knee, but each time he looked, the seat beside him remained empty. He had tried to visit the animal shelter, to talk to some of the dogs there, but the sharp sense of grief only deepened. Max's presence was irreplaceable, and Greg wasn't ready to face that reality yet. The hardest part was seeing the empty harness hanging in the corner of his living room. It still smelled faintly of Max, of dirt, rain, and the faintest trace of soap from their last bath together. He had never realized how much that harness had meant until it was gone. Max had never shown fear, never hesitated to protect, to fight, to follow orders. But now, Greg found himself overwhelmed with the same grief that must have consumed Max in his final moments. The dog had trusted him, loved him unconditionally, and now he was gone, leaving behind nothing but memories and a profound emptiness in his heart. Days blended into weeks, and the weight of the loss began to take root deeper in Greg's chest. He tried to stay busy, tried to throw himself into his work, but it felt like he was moving through water, each step heavier than the last. The calls that once energized him felt pointless now. The patrols a distraction from the ache that never left. At night, he sat in the dark, staring at the empty corner of the room where Max used to rest, his mind replaying memories of the K9's final moments. He couldn't shake the image of Max's lifeless body, the stillness in his eyes. The unspoken bond between them had been forged in years of partnership, and now that bond was fraying, unraveling like thread pulled too tight. There were moments when Greg swore he could still feel Max's presence. In the quiet of his apartment, when the wind rustled through the trees outside, he'd turn instinctively, expecting to see the dog standing by the door, watching him with that calm, trusting gaze. But the air was always empty, the silence always deafening. The guilt lingered. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something more he could have done, some way to have shielded Max from the bullet. Maybe he should have moved faster, reacted sooner. But there was no rewind, no second chance. What was left were the haunting memories and the echoes of a bond that no longer existed in the way it once had. Greg began to withdraw from others. He didn't want their sympathy, their attempts to console him. How could they understand? They hadn't shared the years of trust, of unspoken communication, of the countless hours spent together in life-threatening situations. No one else had been there beside him, in the heat of the moment, when Max had put himself in harm's way to protect him. The days went by, and the feeling of emptiness only grew. Max was gone, and with him, something inside Greg began to fade, too. Greg couldn't escape the heaviness that pressed down on him. It was in every breath he took, every step he made. The absence of Max felt like a phantom weight that he couldn't shake, a constant reminder that something irreplaceable was gone. He couldn't help but wonder if this was what grief was, this suffocating, all-consuming force that settled in his chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to move. The days blurred together, the loss sinking deeper into his bones. He spent hours at the police station, going through the motions, responding to calls, but his mind was never fully there. He had no drive anymore, no purpose beyond the routine. Max had been the one to keep him grounded, the one who made him feel like he was part of something bigger than himself. Now, that purpose felt lost, scattered in 1,000 directions. At home, the emptiness was even more profound. Greg had been so used to the quiet rhythm of his life with Max, the low hum of the dog's breathing as he slept, the shuffle of paws following him from room to room. Now, the silence in the house was oppressive, a constant reminder of everything he'd lost. He found himself pausing in the hallway, glancing toward the empty corner where Max used to lie. It was as if his brain hadn't fully registered that the dog wasn't coming back, and his heart still refused to let go. The hardest part wasn't just the physical absence, it was the emotional toll. Max had been more than a partner. He had been Greg's confidant, his best friend. When Greg was down, Max was always there, with his unwavering loyalty and calm presence. But now, Greg didn't know where to turn. Who could he talk to about the things Max had understood without words? The weight of that silence was unbearable. The loneliness crept in, filling every empty space, suffocating every thought. The loss wasn't just of a dog. It was of everything that dog had represented. And Greg didn't know how to bear it. In a small town just outside of Greg's own, there was a boy named Jamie who spent most of his days in a wheelchair. His world was quieter than most, confined to the four walls of his room, his mother's gentle voice, and the rhythmic hum of the machines that kept him alive. But Jamie had something others didn't, an imagination that ran wild, a mind that roamed free even when his body could not. Every night, he dreamed of a dog. Not just any dog, but a strong, loyal canine. The dog wasn't just an animal in his dreams. It was a protector, a companion, a friend. In these dreams, Jamie and the dog would run together, through fields of gold, past towering trees, and across rivers that sparkled under the moonlight. The dog would nudge his wheelchair, guiding him through places Jamie had never been, but somehow always knew. There was one dream, though, that stood out from the rest. In it, the dog was wounded, hurt in a way that made Jamie's heart ache. It wasn't a dream of joy or freedom like the others. No, this dream was different. It was a dream of loss, a feeling Jamie could never quite understand but felt deep in his bones. In the dream, the dog looked at him with those wise eyes, eyes full of understanding and love, and then it vanished into the mist. Jamie woke with a start, his heart racing. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the dream had meant something more. The next morning, as he sat by the window, watching the world move on without him, a sudden impulse gripped him. It was as if the dream had whispered to him, told him something he wasn't ready to hear, but had to. He didn't know how or why, but he knew he had to find that dog. He had to help him. Jamie's fingers brushed against the small key his mother had given him years ago, a key to his future, to something bigger than himself. And for the first time, he He felt like he was meant for something more. Jamie wheeled himself down the quiet street, the morning sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. His mother had warned him not to go too far, but today felt different. The air felt charged with something he couldn't explain, like the universe was whispering secrets to him. He had no destination in mind, just the urge to move, to follow whatever pull was guiding him. As he passed by the park, he saw something that made him stop, a large dog sitting by a bench, eyes locked on him. Jamie's breath caught in his throat. The dog wasn't like the others he had seen. There was something dignified about him, something that made Jamie's heart beat faster. The dog was watching him, and there was no fear in those eyes, only a strange, calm understanding. Jamie hesitated. It wasn't unusual to see dogs in the park, but this one seemed different. He wheeled closer, his eyes never leaving the dog's steady gaze. The dog didn't bark or wag his tail, but his body was alert, as if he was waiting for something, someone. Slowly, Jamie stopped in front of the dog, unsure of what to do. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then, almost as if by instinct, the dog stood and took a step toward Jamie. He was a massive German shepherd, his coat sleek and dark, but it wasn't his size that took Jamie's breath away. It was the quiet confidence, the intelligence in his eyes, that seemed to say, "I'm here for you." Jamie reached out tentatively, his hand hovering in the air. The dog sniffed his fingers before gently nudging his palm with his nose. The simple contact sent a rush of warmth through Jamie's chest. He didn't know why, but he felt like he had known this dog for a lifetime. The bond was instantaneous, unexplainable. "Are you here for me?" Jamie whispered, more to himself than the dog. The dog gave him a soft, steady look, as if to answer. And in that moment, Jamie knew his life was about to change forever. Jamie couldn't explain it, but the dog had followed him home. He had rolled through the front door of his house, his mind spinning, wondering if he had imagined the entire encounter. But when he looked back, the German shepherd was there, sitting calmly on the porch, watching him with those knowing eyes. His mother had gone out, leaving Jamie alone for the moment. The house felt emptier than usual. It wasn't that he was afraid. He had spent countless hours alone. But today, there was a strange comfort in having the dog there. Jamie wheeled over to the window, his heart racing as the dog remained on the porch, as if waiting for something. The idea that the dog was here for him, that somehow they were meant to be together, felt right. But Jamie had no idea why. That's when he saw them, the two figures moving down the street, coming closer. They didn't look like they belonged in the neighborhood. Yami's gut twisted. There was something off about them. As they walked, they glanced around, their eyes flicking to the houses as if searching for something. Jamie's breath caught in his throat. He had been warned about strangers. The neighborhood wasn't the safest place, especially for someone like him. Vulnerable, easy to overlook. But he didn't have time to think. He wheeled away from the window and reached for his phone, his fingers trembling. Before he could dial, he heard a sharp bark. It wasn't the playful sound of a dog, but something more primal, more urgent. Jamie turned just in time to see the German shepherd leap off the porch, his body tense, tail raised, muscles rippling as he charged toward the figures. A rush of adrenaline surged through Jamie. He had never seen anything like it. The dog was fast, instinctive, a blur of motion. The two figures froze, clearly startled by the dog's sudden aggression. The German shepherd barked again, more menacing this time, until one of them turned and bolted. The other hesitated but followed quickly, both disappearing down the street. The dog returned to Jamie, his tail wagging softly, as if nothing had happened. Jamie's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't just met a dog, he had met a protector. The day after the encounter, Jamie couldn't stop thinking about the dog. He had never seen anyone, or anything, move with such purpose and precision. It wasn't just the way the dog had acted. It was the calmness that came with it. The way he'd faced the threat without hesitation, without fear. For a moment, Jamie had felt a strange sense of safety, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. The dog, whom Jamie had begun calling Max, had stayed with him through the night. He lay quietly at Jamie's feet while the boy watched TV, occasionally nudging his hand as if to say, "I'm here." Max didn't need to bark or act out. He simply existed with a strength that Jamie could feel. There was something in the dog's silence, a quiet power that Jamie could sense, even though it wasn't immediately visible. Max had a way of being present without demanding attention. He didn't try to impress or entertain, he just was. And it was that calm, silent strength that made Jamie feel grounded. In a way, it was what Jamie had always needed. Someone who understood without words. Someone who didn't need explanations or justifications. Max had instinctively become his protector, his guardian, in a way that Jamie never thought was possible for him. The next day, Jamie decided to take Max for a walk around the neighborhood, a small venture out of his usual confines. It wasn't much, but it felt important. As they made their way down the sidewalk, Jamie's wheelchair humming softly against the pavement, he noticed people watching. Some looked away quickly, others stared in awe. They had never seen Max before, and the way he walked beside Jamie, head held high, was a statement in itself. But it wasn't the looks of others that mattered. It was the feeling of strength, of partnership, that Jamie felt as he wheeled forward. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt powerful, connected to something greater than himself. Max was there, not just physically, but with an unspoken promise. No one would touch him again. Not with Max by his side. The weeks following Jamie's first walk with Max felt like a quiet revolution. There was something about the dog's presence that shifted the way Jamie saw the world. Before Max, everything had been a series of obstacles. Walls too high, roads too long, paths too uncertain. But now, with the dog by his side, the barriers that once seemed insurmountable no longer felt as intimidating. Jamie had started pushing himself in ways he hadn't before, slowly venturing out of his comfort zone. He took longer walks, rolling further down the street. He would navigate sidewalks with cracks and uneven patches, no longer hesitating or second-guessing himself. Max was always there, walking beside him, guiding him without pushing, watching him with those steady, reassuring eyes. It was a quiet, steady change, a new rhythm forming between them, like they were two halves of a whole. Max didn't just walk beside Jamie. He was a part of him, a silent strength that gave Jamie the courage to face challenges that once paralyzed him. He no longer needed to rely on others to help him navigate the world. Max had become his foundation, his unspoken support. One afternoon, as they made their way toward the park, Jamie noticed a group of kids playing basketball. The sound of bouncing balls and laughter filled the air, and instinctively, Jamie's eyes fell to the court. His heart twisted. He used to play basketball before his accident. He could still feel the ball in his hands, the rush of adrenaline, the competitive fire that burned in his chest. He stopped for a moment, watching them play. He knew the feeling of being on the court, of pushing himself to his limits. He also knew that, because of his wheelchair, he'd never be able to play the same way again. But then he looked down at Max. The dog was watching him intently, almost as if urging him forward. Jamie's breath hitched. He realized something. He might not be able to play basketball like he used to, but that didn't mean he couldn't still take part. He could adapt. He could break his own barriers. Jamie wheeled closer to the court, Max walking proudly beside him. The world felt different now. It was time to rewrite the rules. Jamie sat at the edge of the park, watching the kids play basketball. The ball bounced off the asphalt with rhythmic thumps, and the sound of their laughter filled the air. It was a sound he used to know well, a sound he used to be a part of. But now, as he sat on the sideline, watching them effortlessly run and jump, he felt the weight of his own isolation. Max lay beside him, his presence a quiet comfort, but Jamie couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. He had come here to watch, to feel some semblance of connection, but instead, it only highlighted how different he was. They didn't know what it felt like to be trapped in a body that didn't move the way it used to have every day feel like an uphill battle against limitations. They didn't know what it was like to have people look at you with pity, to have people treat you like you were fragile, like you were less than. Max nudged Jamie's hand, bringing him out of his thoughts. Jamie smiled faintly, the dog's unwavering loyalty always grounding him when his mind began to spiral. But the truth still lingered. No one understood. No one knew what it was like to live in his shoes. The world around him moved on, and he was left behind, stuck in a world where people saw his wheelchair before they saw him. Jamie's thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind him. "Hey, you need help?" A boy from the basketball game had approached him, looking down with a slightly unsure expression. Jamie's first instinct was to brush him off. It was the same question he'd been asked too many times before. "Do you need help?" Jamie shook his head, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm fine," he replied quietly, feeling the sting of frustration building. He didn't want pity. He didn't want help. He just wanted to be seen as more than the chair he sat in, more than the disability that defined him in the eyes of others. The boy nodded awkwardly, but Jamie could see the confusion in his eyes. The kind of confusion that came from a place of not understanding. And it hurt, because no one did. Not truly. Jamie wheeled away from the park, his mind still churning with the encounter. He didn't want to be looked at with pity, but sometimes it felt like it was all anyone saw when they looked at him. He had grown used to it, even if he hated it. He rolled down the street, trying to shake off the discomfort, but his thoughts wouldn't stop circling back to the boy who had asked if he needed help. That boy, who had no idea how hard it was to be him, had given him a look that felt too familiar, the look of someone who wanted to help but didn't know how. It was well-meaning, but it reminded Jamie of how alone he often felt. He had Max, of course, but the dog couldn't fill all the spaces that were left open by his disability. As they turned onto Jamie's street, Max's ears perked up. The dog's focus shifted suddenly, his body tense. Jamie paused, glancing around, but saw nothing unusual. Then, just as he was about to move on, he noticed a figure in the distance, a shadow lurking near the edge of a yard. It was the same boy from the park, but this time he wasn't alone. Another figure, taller and broader, stood next to him. Jamie's stomach clenched. He watched as the boy seemed to nod toward the house, and then both figures turned and walked down the street, disappearing around the corner. Something about the interaction felt off, as if the boy was hiding something. Max gave a low growl, pulling Jamie's attention back to him. Jamie stared at the spot where the boy had been. His curiosity gnawed at him. What was the boy doing, and why had he been so secretive? Later that evening, as Jamie lay in bed, the images of the boy and his companion played over and over in his mind. Something wasn't right, and Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than met the eye. The boy was hiding something, and Jamie had a feeling that somehow it was connected to him. The next morning, Jamie woke early, the faint remnants of the previous night's unease still lingering in his mind. The encounter with the boy and the strange feeling that had settled over him was hard to shake. He found himself rolling down the street again, not entirely sure why. He just needed to move to clear his head. Max trotted beside him, the dog's steady presence a silent comfort. It was like Max could sense Jamie's restlessness, his need for clarity. They turned the corner onto the main street, and Jamie found himself retracing the path he'd taken the day before. He couldn't quite explain why, but something was drawing him back to the spot where he'd seen the boy. Something felt unfinished. As they neared the park, Max suddenly stopped. His ears perked, and his nose twitched, as if he had caught a scent on the wind. Jamie felt it then, too, an odd shift in the air, a subtle tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He glanced around, but there was no sign of the boy from yesterday. Instead, a quiet presence seemed to be hanging in the air, almost like a magnetic pull. Jamie looked down at Max, who was now standing perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, Jamie simply watched the dog, feeling the connection between them shift, deepen. Max had always been more than just a dog to him. He was a protector, yes, but there was something unspoken, something Jamie couldn't quite name. It wasn't just loyalty. It wasn't just companionship. It was an understanding, something that seemed to link them, soul to soul. And then, as if on cue, the boy appeared at the edge of the park, walking toward them with that same uncertain expression from the day before. Max didn't growl this time. Instead, he stepped forward, closer to Jamie, and for the first time, Jamie felt the dog's quiet confidence settle into him. The boy stopped a few feet away, and Jamie saw it, the unspoken question in his eyes. For a long moment, no words passed between them, But Jamie knew what was coming. Something was changing, something both bigger and more important than either of them understood. And in that silence, he felt the pull, the beginning of something new. Jamie didn't know what to expect when the boy approached him, but he hadn't been ready for this. The boy's eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination, his posture stiff, like he was bracing for something. Max, sensing the change in the air, shifted to stand protectively at Jamie's side, his gaze never leaving the boy. "I need your help," the boy said, his voice trembling but desperate. Jamie blinked, taken aback. He hadn't expected this, especially not from someone who had only glanced at him with curiosity the day before. "Help," Jamie repeated, confusion settling in. "Why would I help you?" The boy stepped closer, his gaze darting around, almost as if checking for someone watching. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I didn't know who else to turn to, but I think Max can help me." The mention of Max caught Jamie off guard. He glanced down at the dog, who was watching the boy with that same steady, knowing look. Max hadn't been a normal dog from the beginning. There was something special about him, something Jamie hadn't fully understood. And now it seemed like someone else recognized that too. "I don't. What are you talking about?" Jamie asked, the confusion deepening. "How do you know about Max?" The boy's eyes flickered with something, guilt perhaps, but he quickly turned his attention back to Jamie, as if he couldn't afford to waste time. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," he said urgently, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to bring this to you, but I've been running from people who they know about me. They know about you, too. About Max." He looked down, his hands trembling. "They want him. They want both of you." Jamie felt the air around him thicken, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. He looked down at Max, who gave a soft whine, a quiet plea, as if to say, "We can't run forever." The boy's eyes locked with Jamie's. "Please, you don't understand. They're already looking for me. They'll come for you too. You have to trust me. Max is the key." And just like that, everything Jamie thought he knew about his life and Max was turned upside down. Jamie's mind raced, his thoughts jumbled and uncertain. The boy's desperate plea echoed in his ears, but the weight of his words felt like a heavy fog clouding his judgment. People were after him. They knew about Max. They were coming for them both. Jamie looked at the boy. He could see the fear in his eyes, the truth that hung between them. And in that moment, something inside Jamie clicked. He didn't fully understand what was going on, or who the people chasing the boy were, but he knew one thing for certain. Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't just his companion. There was more to this. There had always been more. Max shifted at Jamie's side, his steady presence grounding him. And for the first time in a long time, Jamie felt like he wasn't alone in this. The dog wasn't just there to protect him physically. There was something more to their bond, something instinctive that Jamie couldn't quite explain. "Okay," Jamie said quietly, his voice steady, though his heart was still racing. "I'll help you, but we need answers. I need to know what this is all about." The boy nodded quickly, relief flashing across his face. "I didn't want to drag you into this, but now I don't have a choice. They'll come for me soon, and when they do, they won't stop until they get what they want." Jamie felt the gravity of the situation settle in his chest. This wasn't just about him and Max anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. "We'll take the first step," Jamie said, his voice firmer than he felt. "But we need to move fast." Max's ears perked up, as if in agreement, and he trotted ahead, his steps purposeful, guiding Jamie forward. The boy hesitated for a moment, then followed them both, his eyes scanning the street, ever watchful. The path ahead was unknown, the danger real, but for the first time in a long time, Jamie didn't feel paralyzed by fear. With Max by his side, and the boy now trusting him with the truth, Jamie knew they were ready to face whatever came next. This was just the beginning. As they moved through the quiet streets, the weight of their mission settled on Jamie's shoulders. He wasn't sure exactly what they were walking into, but the boy had made it clear. There was no going back. The world they'd known had shifted, and they were now on the run. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but Max's steady presence kept him grounded. With every step Jamie took, he could feel the dog's watchful eyes on him, as if silently assuring him that, no matter what came, they would face it together. The boy, whose name was Ethan, Jamie had learned, kept a few paces behind them. Jamie could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted around, scanning every corner, every alley. It wasn't fear that drove him, but caution, the kind of alertness that came from a life lived constantly on edge. "Why do they want you?" Jamie finally asked, breaking the silence that had hung heavy between them since their decision to leave the safety of the neighborhood. He needed to understand, to make sense of the chaos that was suddenly his life. Ethan looked over at him, his expression conflicted, like he was wrestling with whether or not to say more. "It's not just me they're after. It's what I know, what they think I know." He hesitated, and for a moment, Jamie thought he wouldn't say anything more. But then Ethan continued, his voice low. "There are things I can't explain, things they don't want anyone finding out." Jamie felt a chill. "Like what?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't have all the answers, but I know I can't do this alone. I need help, Jamie. And Max. Max is the key to everything." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Jamie felt a surge of unease. He wasn't sure what Ethan was talking about, but the boy was right about one thing. They were in this together now. Whether they liked it or not, they were a team. And just like that, Jamie realized that he had crossed a point of no return. No longer just a boy in a wheelchair with a dog by his side. He was now part of something bigger, something that could change everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet street, Jamie felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't had in years. It was hope. It was the kind of hope that came from standing on the edge of the unknown, with no clear path ahead, but knowing that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Max walked beside him, steady and strong, and Ethan, though guarded, was right there too, a reluctant but necessary ally in a world suddenly full of secrets and dangers. They had made their way to an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, far from the eyes of anyone who might be looking for them. The place was quiet, the kind of place people forgot existed, tucked away between overgrown trees and rusted fences. Jamie could feel the weight of the air pressing down on them, the silence of the place both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Inside, the warehouse smelled of dust and disuse, but it was a refuge for the moment. The three of them stood together in the center of the vast, empty space, each lost in their own thoughts, but united by the bond that had formed between them. Max circled the floor, nose to the ground, as if ensuring the place was safe before they settled. Ethan leaned against one of the broken windows, his eyes distant. "We can't stay here long," he said, his voice low. "But it's safe for now." Jamie nodded, though a part of him didn't want to think about what came next. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe. Maybe it was the relief of not being alone in the fight, or maybe it was the strange, undeniable pull that had connected him to Max, to Ethan, and to this unexpected path they were now on. Whatever it was, it felt like a new beginning. "We'll figure this out," Jamie said, his voice more confident than he felt. He wasn't sure where the road would take them, but as long as they were together, he knew they had a chance. And for the first time, that was enough. Max had always been a calm, obedient dog, but tonight there was something different in his demeanor. He paced restlessly around the warehouse, his usual composure replaced with tension. Jamie sat against the wall, trying to steady his breath as the weight of their situation settled on him. Ethan was nearby, crouched down and checking the equipment they had scavenged, but Jamie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Max stopped in his tracks, his ears twitching as if hearing something Jamie couldn't. He looked toward the entrance, his body stiffening and his eyes narrowed. For a moment, Jamie thought he imagined it, but then he saw the way Max's muscles tensed. The dog wasn't just alert. He was on edge, resisting something that was trying to pull him. "Mux!" Jamie called softly, hoping to calm the dog down, but Max's response was a sharp growl, deep and low, a sound Jamie had never heard from him before. Ethan stood up, his eyes immediately locking onto the dog. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Jamie shook his head. "I don't know. He's never acted like this before. Max whined, stepping away from Jamie and moving toward the back of the warehouse. He stopped at a corner, his body trembling as though he were resisting an unseen force. Jamie followed the dog, unsure of what was happening, but feeling a strange sense of urgency that seemed to echo from Max. As Jamie reached the corner, he could feel the hairs on his neck stand up. The air was heavy with tension, thick with something Jamie couldn't explain. Max turned to look at him, his eyes wide with an unspoken plea, as if he were asking for permission to act. "Go ahead, Max," Jamie said, his voice quiet but resolute. Max barked once, sharply, and then, as if some invisible barrier had been lifted, he ran forward, his instincts taking over. Jamie couldn't explain it, but he knew that Max was resisting something darker, something that had been pulling at him. The canine's resistance wasn't just to the danger ahead. It was a defiance of whatever force was trying to control him. And Jamie realized, with a surge of hope, that Max wasn't just a protector. He was a fighter. The night felt impossibly still, the warehouse air thick with tension. Jamie watched as Max moved with purpose, his body low to the ground, his senses sharpened as if attuned to something Jamie couldn't see. He had never seen the dog like this before, focused but not just on the immediate surroundings. It was as if Max was responding to something distant, something far beyond the physical realm they occupied. The dog's resistance had felt like a warning, but now, with each stride, it felt like a call to action. Jamie swallowed hard, trying to focus through the haze of his own unease. He looked at Ethan, who stood frozen, eyes wide as he watched Max. There was fear in his expression, not for himself, but for the unknown they were facing. "Max knows something we don't," Jamie said quietly, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. Ethan glanced at him, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. What if it's a trap? What if the dog's leading us straight into danger? Jamie thought about it for a moment, the doubt gnawing at him. But as he watched Max pause near the far corner, he felt a shift in the air. There was no more hesitation, no more fear, just trust. Max wasn't leading them into danger. He was showing them the way. "He's leading us toward the truth," Jamie said, his voice steady, more certain than he felt. Without thinking, he pushed himself forward, his wheelchair rolling silently over the cold concrete floor. Max turned his head briefly, catching Jamie's eyes, and Jamie felt that silent understanding between them, a bond that didn't need words. He trusted Max, just as Max trusted him. They moved deeper into the warehouse, the silence pressing in around them. The further they went, the more Jamie felt the weight of his decision. There was no turning back. They had crossed a line, and now, it was too late to wonder what would have happened if they'd stayed behind. At the end of the long corridor, Max stopped, standing still, and Jamie's heart skipped. In front of them, hidden beneath layers of dust and shadows, was an old, rusted door. The key, the one thing they'd been searching for. Max turned to Jamie, his eyes bright, as if saying, "Trust in the unthinkable. This is where it begins." Jamie's hand tightened around the wheels of his chair as he approached the rusted door Max had led them to. There was something about it, something unsettling. The dog had stopped, his body tense, eyes fixed on the door with the kind of intensity Jamie had never seen before. He could feel it now, the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever lay beyond it was not just a part of their journey. It was the pivotal moment, the turning point. The door itself was heavy, its surface scarred by years of neglect, but something about the way Max stood in front of it made Jamie pause. It was as if the dog was waiting for something, some signal he couldn't decipher. Without a word, Jamie rolled closer, reaching for the door handle. But before he could touch it, the air around them seemed to change, shifting in a way that sent a shiver down Jamie's spine. Max's growl broke the silence, low and menacing. A sudden noise echoed from behind the door, a soft scrape, followed by the faintest of movements. Jamie's heart raced. It wasn't just a noise, it was a warning. But from what? Or who? Max's growl intensified, and Jamie knew they weren't alone anymore. There was something, or someone, on the other side of that door. He could feel it in his bones. "Stay back, Jamie," Ethan said, his voice tense with urgency. This doesn't feel right. But Jamie couldn't back down. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn away now, not when Max was depending on him. With a deep breath, Jamie pushed the door open, and the sound of it scraping against the floor echoed through the empty space. What lay beyond wasn't what he expected. Instead of darkness or emptiness, the room was filled with shadows, figures moving too quickly for Jamie to track. Before he could react, a figure lunged toward him. Max leaped, intercepting the figure midair with a snarl, his teeth bared. The unexpected challenge was here, and it was more than either of them could have anticipated. The air was thick with tension, the room suddenly alive with movement. Max's growl filled the space, a warning, a challenge. The figure who had lunged toward Jamie stumbled back, caught off guard by the dog's ferocity. The shadows around them shifted, and Jamie's heart pounded as he instinctively rolled backward, putting some distance between himself and the danger. The figure paused, then slowly rose to their feet, revealing the faintest silhouette in the dim light. Jamie's breath caught in his throat. The voice that followed was familiar, too familiar. Well, if it isn't Jamie. Jamie's eyes widened as the figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. His chest tightened, and a wave of disbelief swept over him. Standing before him was someone from his past, someone he had never expected to see again. "Max, stay," Jamie said, his voice steady despite the shock surging through him. The dog's ears twitched, but he stayed in place, watching the newcomer with a mixture of suspicion and alertness. "Sam." Jamie's voice cracked, barely a whisper. The man in front of him was older now, his face weathered, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Sam had been his partner in the force years ago, a name that had slipped into the past when Jamie had left that life behind. The man's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. "I didn't think you'd remember me. It's been a while." Jamie's mind raced, the pieces falling into place with chilling clarity. Sam had been one of the few people who knew everything about him, everything about the life he had tried to leave behind. He had been his partner, his confidant, until things had gone wrong, until the trust had shattered. Max growled again, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Jamie's chest. Jamie could feel the unease growing in his bones as the weight of the past settled back into his present. Sam was no ally. Whatever had brought him here now, it wasn't good. And then Sam spoke again, his voice smooth and cold. "I should have known you'd come back for him. But it's too late, Jamie. You're too late." Sam's words hung in the air, thick with a venomous edge. Jamie's stomach churned, the familiar tension creeping up his spine. This wasn't just about the past anymore. Sam's presence here, now, meant something far more dangerous. It meant that whatever was coming next was far from over. Max stood at Jamie's side, his body taut with readiness, but there was a moment of hesitation in the air. The dog could sense it too, the unsettling familiarity of the situation, the weight of the unspoken history between Jamie and Sam. "What do you want, Sam?" Jamie's voice was steady, though his hands tightened around the wheels of his chair. He had to remain calm, had to control the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. There was no turning back now, not with Max at his side, not with Ethan standing behind him, watching with cautious eyes. Sam's lips twisted into a sneer. "It's not about what I want, Jamie. It's about what's been set in motion. You think you've outrun all this, but the truth is, you've only just stepped back into it." He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "And now, you and your precious dog are right in the middle of it." Jamie felt the weight of Sam's words press on him like a physical force. He had tried to leave the past behind, to move forward, but the past always had a way of finding its way back. He had tried to escape it once, but this time, he wouldn't run. This time, he would rise above it. Max let out a growl, but Jamie held his hand out, silencing the dog with a single gesture. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Sam, not of what he represented, not of the shadowy forces that had been pulling at them all. This was his moment. "You think you've got the power here, Sam?" Jamie's voice was low, but firm. "You don't. This isn't about the past. It's about the present, and I'm done being controlled by it." With those words, Jamie pushed forward, the wheels of his chair moving with a newfound strength. The past may have been back, but it wasn't going to define him. He had Max, and that was all he needed to rise above it. The warehouse felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with impending confrontation. Sam's cold eyes never left Jamie, and the dog's growl still rumbled low in the background. But Jamie stood his ground. He had never felt this certain, this sure of his place in the moment. The tension in the room wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that everything he had gone through, everything he had fought for, had led to this point. Max stood just behind him, a quiet strength in every muscle, his presence a silent promise. Jamie could feel the dog's steady gaze, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Ethan shifted behind them, his body tense, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes now. Understanding, maybe even trust. They had come this far, and Jamie wasn't about to let the past dictate the outcome. Not anymore. Sam stepped forward, his lips curling into a smile that was more like a sneer. You really think you can handle this, Jamie? You've been running from it your whole life, and now you're just going to face it head on. Jamie's heart pounded, but there was no hesitation in his voice. I'm not running anymore, and I won't let you control me. Sam laughed, but it was hollow, the sound echoing off the walls of the warehouse. You think you're different? You're just like me, Jamie. You've always been just like me. Jamie's eyes narrowed. He knew Sam was trying to break him down, trying to twist the truth into something it wasn't. But he wouldn't fall for it. Not this time. This ends now, Jamie said, his voice unwavering. You don't get to control anyone anymore. Not me, not Max, not anyone. In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The past, the doubts, the fears, they all seemed to fade into the background. What mattered now was the final test, the moment where Jamie knew who he really was.